Vice President of the Secular Student Society here at UIC. I am honored to be your moderator for this evening. I would like to first thank each of you for coming tonight and being a part of this event. As you know, there is food available. There's also a materials table that has some free information for you. There are also some books available for a small fee. So tonight, our debate, we will be thinking about the question, can we be good without God? This debate is meant to bring light to different perspectives on morality. We also hope that this debate will be enlightening and an encouraging of critical thinking. I'd like to request that everyone be respectful of all opinions expressed throughout this debate and that no purposeful interruptions or distractions occur while the debaters are speaking. I would also like to request that everyone please turn off their electronic devices and cell phones. Please silence those. Many people have worked hard on making tonight a success. I would like to personally thank Crew for their very positive partnership throughout the planning process. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the UIC Program of Religious Studies and the Secular Student Alliance for their support and contributions to this event. And a big thank you to our debaters, Dan Barker and Dr. Constantine Campbell, for their time tonight and for their efforts in preparing for this debate. In the spirit of solidarity, I would like to request Andrew, a member of Crew, who will be coming up and introducing the debater, who will be answering the affirmative to the debate question, can we be good without God?
I'll just talk loud. I'm Andrew. I'm a member at Crew. Just take a minute to talk about Crew and then introduce Mr. Barker. Crew is a Christian organization that's present on 2,000 college campuses here in the U.S. and another 3,000 campuses worldwide. Here at UIC, we are a close community that is passionate about connecting people to Jesus Christ. We do that through our large group weekly meetings that are held on Wednesday, 5:30 at the Rathskeller Lounge, which is below the atrium. We also do it through our men's and women's Bible studies throughout the week, different social gatherings, conferences throughout the year, and meetings like those. Wherever students are in their spiritual journey, it is our desire to help them learn and grow closer to Christ. All right, Mr. Barker, I have the pleasure of introducing you. Mr. Barker became a teenage evangelist at the age of 15. He maintained a touring musical ministry for 17 years, including 8 full years of cross-country evangelism. Following 5 years of reading, Mr. Barker gradually outgrew his religious beliefs. He wrote, "If I had limited myself to Christian authors, I'd still be a Christian today." He announced his atheism publicly in January of 1984. He has been a staff member of the Freedom from Religious Foundation since 1987. Dan is also the co-host of a weekly podcast, Freedom Thought Radio, with his wife, Anne Lorraine Taylor.
Thank you, Andrew. Now I'll have the president of the Secular Student Society come up and introduce the debater who will be answering the negative to the debate question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew. I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Constantine Campbell and introducing him. Dr. Constantine Campbell is an Australian New Testament scholar, musician, speaker, and professor at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Deerfield, Illinois. He was raised a member of the Greek Orthodox Church, but hated it, believing that religion was a meaningless human construct. It was not until his time at music school studying jazz saxophone that Dr. Campbell was exposed to the teaching of the Bible. This led him on a journey of study and exploration into the historical basis for Christianity and its claims about Jesus Christ. Facing some opposition from his family, he became a Christian while a university student on the basis of the historical evidence about Jesus. Dr. Campbell studied further at seminary and then received his PhD in ancient history, ancient Greek language and linguistics from Macquarie University, Sydney. Dr. Campbell's book, Paul and Union with Christ, was the 2014 Christianity Today Book of the Year in Biblical Studies. His 9th and 10th books will be released later this year. Dr. Campbell remains an active jazz saxophonist and is married with 3 children. Welcome.
begun. Dan Barker is the affirmative for the debate question, so he will be providing his opening statement first. Once Dan Barker is finished, Dr. Constantine Campbell will be automatically coming up and providing his opening statement. Rebuttals and cross-examinations will then be given by each debater, followed by a 10-minute break. After the break, second rebuttals and closing statements will be made. There will be a 20-minute question and answer session at the end. In your programs, you will find 2 response cards. One is for you to fill out if you're interested in joining or hearing more about either of the student organizations represented tonight, Crew or the Secular Student Society. The second card is for you to write down any questions you have for one or both of the debaters. During the 10-minute break, please place your question cards in the white basket on the table in the back. Members for both the student organizations will choose a few of those questions from the piles to include during the question and answer session. So let's not delay any further and start the debate. Dan Barker, you will be timed. Please go ahead and come up with your opening statement, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Sarah, SSS, and Crew, and all of you for coming. Yes, you can be good without God. Did you see the billboards that were up and around Chicago this last month or so? They're all over the town. How many? Tom Cara is the director of our FFRF chapter. Like 15 or 20 billboards of atheists, agnostics, non-believers who are local residents here who are good without God. They each put their names. Are some of you here who had your names on a... Yeah, thanks. Don't be that shy. We're in university here. So yes, you can be good without God. Atheists and agnostics are good people. I think most Christians are good people. Most people who believe in God are wonderful people. Muslims are good people. I've debated Muslim scholars. They're beautiful. They're peaceful people. Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, they are to be applauded for the wonderful contributions they've made to the world in charity and in compassion, working for peace, working for fairness. Most believers in God are great people, and I like to march in marches with a lot of them. But we can say the same thing about most atheists and most agnostics. Most atheists are good people. They are charitable. They are kind. They are moral. They are good. They have family values. They sit on juries. They serve in the military. They're on the police force and in the fire departments. They are part of the same human species that we are all a part of. How many of you think atheists can be good people? Right? Look at all those hands. Well, then you will join me in disagreeing with the Bible. Because the Bible says we cannot be good people. I think you all know a psalm. Did you bring your Bible tonight, by the way? You should have if you're coming to a debate on God. Psalm 14 says this: Fools say in their hearts, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. Those of you who raised your hands disagree with the Bible. There's one evidence that the Bible has at least one mistake in it. One of many evidences that the Bible is contradictory and unreliable. Non-believers know that goodness does not come from following orders. Goodness does not come from a look-up list or a code of how we should act. Goodness does not come from pleasing the authority. The way to be good, and I think all of us, atheists or believers, whatever your position is, I think we will all agree with this. The way to be good is to act with the intention of minimizing harm. That's what good means, minimizing harm. Harm, whatever it is a natural thing in the real world. Harm is not offending the fragile ego of some dictator who needs to be worshipped, and if you don't say the right words on the right day, he's going to be angry and punish you forever. That's not harm. If it's a harm, it's the problem of the dictator, of the Lord, of the sovereign. Here in a country where we fought a proudly rebellious war, kicking out the Lord, the sovereign, the dictator, where we all are free to think for ourselves, where we have a country where we can make up our own minds to believe or not to believe. How many of you think it's a good thing that women can vote? How many of you think that's a good thing? Isn't that a great thing? Elizabeth Cady Stanton dedicated a half a century in the 19th century of her life, fighting desperately for the right that women should have, imagine this, to participate in their own democracy. They couldn't do that. In fact, many churches, most churches, were opposed to that, because the Bible says women should keep silent and learn from their husbands at home. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was an atheist. Her cohort, Susan B. Anthony, was an agnostic, a member of the Unitarian Church, but an agnostic. These were women without belief in a God, without a God who, as you admit, did good things. Beatrice Webb and her husband Sidney Webb in the 19th century in England, they were pretty wealthy, but they were concerned about the poverty in London. They went down there and they worked with the poor. In fact, they disguised themselves so they wouldn't look like rich people. And they were so concerned about the poverty and the sickness there that they helped to start the British healthcare system. How many of you think it's a good thing that there's healthcare and that the poor, the needs of the poor are being met? They were both atheists and they did good things. I could go on with a list after list. I have a book called The Good Atheist, which lists the contributions made to the world by people like Bill Gates, who doesn't believe in God and yet has donated dozens of billions of dollars to doing good things in the world. The way to be good is not a lookup list or a holy book. If the Bible is the way to be good, if the Bible is our source of morality, which I used to preach, then why is it that good Christian and Jews who go to church and synagogue, who pray, they're wonderful people, they love Jesus, or they love Yahweh, they love their faith, and they're really good people. Why is it that these people don't agree with each other? Even though Paul said in 1 Corinthians, the first chapter, you should all be of one mind and there should be no disagreement among you. You know, Paul said, God is not the author of confusion, but can you think of a single book in history that's caused more confusion than the Bible? Believers in that book do not agree with each other. Take any social issue that we're struggling with right now, any moral issue in society. You name it, gay marriage, the death penalty, abortion rights, or stem cell research, or doctor-assisted suicide, corporal punishment, the environment, war, birth control, gun control, you name it. These issues that society is struggling with, moral issues. Good, church-going Christians who are really fine people, they march on opposite sides of those marches. They don't agree with each other about what are the moral issues. You can't go to the Bible and make a look-up list of how to be good. As I said earlier, the way to be good is to act with the intention of minimizing harm. Harm is not supernatural. Harm is hunger, it is predation, it is disease, it is threats, it is the environment. Harm can be inequality or unsafe working conditions or pollutants. You name it. Whatever the harm is that we're trying to fight, it is a natural thing. The exercise of minimizing harm is a natural exercise. It doesn't come from above and supernatural. It comes from us using our reason with... Have you ever seen those cartoons where there's a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other? Ooh, what should I do? That's kind of silly. But I think instead of an angel and a demon, we should put instinct and law. As people that we would want to consult. Instinct is the minds of our ancestors. Law is the minds of the society we live with. And if you use reason in the middle to evaluate the consequences of your actions, because some of our instincts are very nurturing and very good. Some of them are very violent. We all come prepackaged with this array from our ancestors. If you use reason to evaluate the relative merits of the consequences of the actions you are contemplating, and you intend to act in a way that reduces the overall amount of real harm in the real world, that is what morality is. That's what good means. What else could it possibly mean? Is good saying, Daddy, what should I do? Oh, good, I want to please you. If a child's going to run out in the street and the daddy says, don't do that, and the kid said, why? And the daddy says, because I said so. I'm the authority. If you disagree with me, you've offended my holiness and my vanity, and I will punish you forever. Is that goodness? Shouldn't the daddy say, there's a danger out there. There's real harm in the real world, material harm, and I'm trying to avoid you encountering that harm. Someday that child will grow up and understand a moral philosophy and principles. So believers don't agree on what good means. The Bible doesn't agree. You can pick from the Bible whatever you want. Holy books do not agree on how to be good. The way to be good is to act with this compass in mind, using reason. Now abideth instinct, law, and reason. But the greatest of these is reason. Use your mind. Be educated. Find out what are the consequences of your actions. Look at them in the real world and say, oh, I'm going to have to go this. I'm going to have to be good by doing this. Should women be allowed to vote? What are the consequences of that, right? Should poor people be left sick without health care? Look at the consequences of that. Look at the real world. You can be good without God. We are good without God. In spite of what this primitive, irrational, and divisive and dangerous book says about how we should live our lives, millions of good Americans, tens of millions of good Americans know that yes, you can be good without God.
Can we be good without God? Of course we can. I know plenty of good atheists. Some of my dearest friends and family members are atheists, and they're good people. So, have I just lost this debate? That was quick. Maybe we should just go home.
Play some jazz.
All right. But not so fast. Let's think about this question. What does it really mean to be good? And what does it mean without God? Let me begin there. I've already suggested that we can be good without believing in God. That's why there are good atheists. I don't dispute that. But can we be good without the existence of God? Whether you believe in him or not, my contention is that we cannot be good apart from the existence of God. We all agree that humans are moral beings. We are all concerned about morality, about right and wrong, and about refining our ethical theories. In part, that's why we're here tonight. But where does our morality come from? Maybe relativism is the answer. There is no single moral code, after all. We are the products of our culture and our families and our histories. If you were born in Afghanistan, you would think differently from someone born in America. And I agree with this, but it is not a satisfactory answer by itself. Yes, we are shaped by the values of culture, family, and history, but this does not answer the fundamental question, why are we moral beings in the first place? The fact remains that we are moral beings. We are hardwired for morality. Our moral code may vary, but the code is uploaded to our existing hardware. I can choose which operating system to install on my MacBook, OS 10 or maybe Linux or some other thing. But the fact remains that my Mac is built to house an operating system. So we are built to accept a moral code, whichever code one may upload. So where does our moral hardware come from? Of course, some have attempted to ground our morality in evolutionary theory. But these attempts fall short in spectacular fashion. Is morality simply a survival instinct? If so, why are we concerned about the details of morality? Why not simply work out how best to survive? Why worry about topics such as the survival of other species, for example? Even species that have nothing to do with human survival. Even species that threaten human life, such as sharks and crocodiles, which we have plenty of in Australia. If morality is the product of Darwinism, are other species moral beings too? No, other species are not moral in any way that resembles our understanding of morality, yet they have also flourished. The flourishing of our species simply does not depend on whether or not we are polite to each other, tell white lies, care about the survival of the dung beetle, or cheat just a little bit on our taxes. In fact, human history is full of much worse crimes than these, and our species has thrived nonetheless, oftentimes because we have been grossly immoral. Evolution simply does not establish grounds for morality. The only plausible explanation for the existence of our moral hardware is that we are intentionally built that way. If this is so, it is impossible to be good without God. You may not believe in God, that he has made you a moral creature regardless of what you believe. My second question is, what do we mean by good? Who defines what good is? How do we choose a good moral code? If we are simply products of evolutionary processes, perhaps good is defined by social Darwinism. This is the belief that our moral code ought to be based on the principles that got us this far, the principles of survival. But there are a few problems with social Darwinism. First, it is built on a fallacy. The is to ought fallacy in particular. David Hume successfully argued that we cannot say anything about what we ought to do based on what is. But this is exactly what social Darwinism says. Because we are the products of evolution, we ought to live according to the principles of evolution. That's a logical fallacy. But let's put the fallacy to one side for a moment. What does evolutionary morality look like? Darwin argued that the twin principles of evolutionary ethics are the struggle for survival and the survival of the fittest. How is the survival of the fittest applied morally? Well, just take a look at Nazi Germany. Jews, gypsies, the handicapped, homosexuals, and other weak minorities were justly eradicated because they weakened the gene pool. Therefore, it is morally right to crush the weak. Does that sound good to you? What about humanism? Humanism stresses the goodness of humanity, our common needs, and seeks the flourishing of our species. But why is it good that humanity flourishes? Obviously, we're in favor of it, being human, but why is it good? Apart from our own self-interest. Isn't that just declaring ourselves to be the ultimate good? On what grounds? What if the ultimate good is the good of the entire planet? Humanity has been the most destructive species in the history of the world. Surely the planet would be better off without us. What has humanity contributed besides its own flourishing? The destruction of thousands of other species, rainforests, the ozone layer, Arctic glaciers, and countless other horrors. What is the most destructive force on Earth? Look in the mirror. Humanism is nice for humans, but there is no objective basis for it. The most logical moral outlook based on atheism is nihilism. If we are simply products of blind evolutionary chance, we must conclude that life is without objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. Richard Dawkins says, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. There is no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Did you hear that? There is no justice, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nihilism eradicates any objective basis for morality, and nihilism is the inevitable conclusion of atheism. What is the difference between Adolf Hitler and Mother Teresa? The nihilistic answer is nothing. There is no difference at all. Both lived, both died. They no longer exist. There is no evil and no good. They're just meaningless dust in a random universe. Does that sound good? How then do we define good? Social Darwinism is grounded on a logical fallacy and generates wicked morality in any case. Humanism is logically unfounded and comes at a huge cost to the rest of the planet. Nihilism alone is logically derived from atheism, and it eliminates any basis for morality. To conclude briefly this opening statement, I want to articulate the good from a Christian perspective. Christian morality can be summed up with one word: love. Jesus said, love God love one another. Even love your enemies. But what is love? The biblical conception of love is not a feeling, it is not an emotion, it is not Hollywood love. Love is expressed in action. The Apostle John says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And Paul says God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Love is defined by action and by self-sacrifice in particular. Jesus Christ died for us. He died for humanity's rebellion against God and for our lack of love toward each other, for our reckless treatment of the world in which we live, and for our selfish self-preservation at the expense of others. He died that we may be reconciled to God and to each other. That is the Christian good, to live like that. Thank you.
Now we're going to go into the rebuttal session. So, Dan Barker, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Tom. We talked about possibly doing a jazz piano because I play jazz piano. But it just didn't work tonight. Maybe at the next, maybe we'll come to an agreement and the next debate can just be music. So it looks like we do have some agreement here. We both define morality in terms of action. And I think there's a common point there. And I think all religions would say that. When a religion talks about peace and love and joy and all those things, who would argue with that? You know, atheists aren't opposed to that. I don't know any atheists who are nihilistic. There are a few atheistic philosophers that sometimes theists like to put up, like Schopenhauer, let's say, who said the only thing better than suicide is never having been born in the first place. You know, that's nihilism. You know, I don't know any atheists who are like that. We enjoy our lives. Kant is confusing ultimate with immediate. He's doing the same mistake that other theistic philosophers like William Lane Craig have made and Warren have done, thinking that because meaning and purpose in morality is not ultimately in cosmic, because in the cosmic scale it is true, there is no meaning, there is no purpose, it's all going to be over someday. He's confusing that with our daily lives. Bertrand Russell said, just because happiness isn't eternal doesn't mean it's any less happy. Suppose you're working at your job, you're looking forward to a great vacation that's coming up. You're planning to go skiing or swimming or shopping, whatever. Your dream vacation is coming up. But then you think, wait a minute, when it's over, I have to go back to work. I may as well not go. It's ultimately meaningless. I'm not going to go on my vacation. Would you cancel your vacation? Or would you enjoy it because it's here? This life that we have ultimately is meaningless. But immediately it is not. Just because there's no ultimate justice doesn't mean there's not immediate justice. Just because there's no cosmic meaning doesn't mean there's no immediate meaning in our own lives on this planet. I was in the Detroit airport back in the late 80s going to the Phil Donahue show, waiting to catch a plane, and in the corner of my eye I saw this baby kicked on this carrier. It was like on the luggage, and I just went like this. And I caught that baby carrier as it was falling, and then the mother grabbed the other side like a second later. She would have been too late. I wasn't thinking about morality. I wasn't thinking about Jesus or Joseph Smith or Muhammad or how can I show the world that atheists are good people. I was not contemplating any moral philosophy. I instinctively reached over. You would have done the same thing, right? Who wants to see a baby fall to a hard floor? Why did I do that? I didn't know those people. They might have been Republicans, I don't know. Or they might have been Democrats. Whatever, you know. Why did I do that? Instinctively, we inherit from evolution, from our ancestors, because they made the decisions that our ancestors, our potential ancestors, who didn't care about falling babies, were less likely to leave their genes into the future. And those who did bequeathed their decisions to us. Instinct and evolution are a part of morality. It's not the whole thing. But I knew exactly what to do instinctively. Other animals also express moral sentiments. Seals, and there was an underwater mine that exploded prematurely, and a dolphin got stunned. And 2 other dolphins came up beside it and lifted it by its fins to the surface until it could breathe enough. Chimpanzees trying to help a wounded bird. A dolphin helping a drowning dog. You see this all over the place. Instinctively, we have these feelings, and even Thomas Jefferson talked about it. Where did this come from? This natural altruism and empathy that we have. When you see the headlines about horrible things that people are doing, what is your first thought? What an inhuman thing to do. Evolution does explain a big part of our moral philosophies. Morality doesn't have to come from somewhere. Did you notice that Kant didn't connect any dots tonight? He just said, God has to be, the existence of God has to be, but he didn't connect it to anything. In fact, there is no God. There's no evidence for a God. There's no good definition for a God. There's no agreement among believers about the existence of this God. There's no answer to the problem of evil. No good answer to the problem of evil. And there's no need for a God. Before you're going to make an argument that God is the source of morality, first you have to prove the existence or make a reasonable case for the existence of this being. You may as well set leprechauns, or you may as well set something else. Since the question of the existence of God is not only not settled, but very, very dubious in the minds of many of us, then you're not connecting any dots to it. You're just saying that somehow, magically, this thing that you're imagining somehow is the source, as if morality even needs a source. When you phrase questions like that, you're begging the question. It's like, who pops up the next Kleenex? Well, when you say who, you're assuming that there's an answer. And so it's begging the question or circular reasoning. Provide evidence for the existence of this creature that you think exists, who created everything. And I think you said that we all come prepackaged with a operating system that requires a moral code. I disagree with that. As I explained earlier, morality is not a code. It's not a lookup list. When that baby was falling, did I consult some holy scripture? What thou shalt do, rule number 43, when babies are falling. Is that how you make moral decisions, is look up a list of things? If you look at the Ten Commandments, it's a horrible moral list. There are 3 good things in the Ten Commandments that relate to modern American law, but they were common to all religious systems and even moral systems outside and predated Christianity. The Golden Rule in Christianity long predated Jesus, and it was even phrased much better. Love your neighbor was not such a big surprise like Christianity has some special truth that the rest of us... Are we so dumb that it would never have dawned on us that there's something wrong with killing without some tablets coming down from us? Is that how little we think of ourselves? We don't need a moral code. In fact, moral codes can be dangerous because they're inflexible. Look at what has happened through history with people blindly following moral codes. For example, the Lutherans and the Catholics in Germany, who were the members of the Nazi Party, they were churchgoers, they were believers. I know it's bad form to bring up Hitler during a debate, but he started it, right? So they were believers. Hitler was a weird Christian, but he was a Christian. He was a member of the Catholic Church in good standing. He was not an atheist. He credited Jesus as his inspiration. He was very much kind of like a modern right-wing Christian today. He was anti-abortion. He wanted prayers in the schools and so on. So he was Stalin was a horrible atheist. I agree with that. Hitler was a horrible Christian. You don't measure your religion by the stack of bodies. You measure it by real consequences in the real world. So, humanism, you grossly misrepresented humanism. Humanism also involves other species as well, and the entire planet. If you read the humanistic writings, it's not just about me, humanism. If you look at the Christian system of morality, it's all about me, the jealous God. Thou shalt worship me only and don't look at any other gods, like a jealous husband. If you look at the Old Testament, the God of the Old Testament really was, as Richard Dawkins says, jealous and capriciously malevolent and intolerant and unjust and genocidal. He told them to go in and invade this land and take over the cities and kill all the people, men, women, and children. That's the moral God that Khan is worshiping. Kill all of them. Kill all the animals as well. Save a few animals so you can make a blood sacrifice to me because I need to be worshipped. I'm jealous and you shouldn't look at any other gods or other men. It was obviously written by a macho man, right? Treating his people like it was a woman. In fact, the Jewish people were always treated in the Old Testament as if they were a woman. They went whoring, they went cheating. Is that morality? To worship a being like that? A being whom we would call a monster? A being whom we would lock up if he lived in our own country? A being who had no respect for human life? A being who said in Psalm 137:9, you should be happy to dash the innocent babies against the rocks. It doesn't say you might have to regretfully do it during wartime. You know, sometimes you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. God in the Bible said you should be happy to dash the innocent babies against the rocks. What crime did the babies do? If you are not happy dashing innocent babies against the rocks, Con, then you're not a good moral Christian. The Bible tells you to do these things. The Bible tells you to stone homosexuals to death. Their blood shall be upon them. The Bible tells you to put me to death. In 2 Chronicles chapter 15, as a non-believer, I should be put to death. That's the source of morality? Isn't morality more looking at real consequences in the real world, how the real harm affects our immediate actions, not some cosmic purpose? What good is cosmic purpose anyway? In fact, if heaven is ultimate purposelessness, then it's just empty. It's just nothing. It'd be like being in North Korea, just worshiping the dictator forever and ever. Where's the morality in that? Real morality is human beings who have empathy and altruism and moral philosophy and a brain with reason, caring about other human beings in the real world, forgetting what your religious beliefs are. Let's get along. If you want to be a good person, then don't follow a code. Just be a good person.
Well, there's a lot to respond to there. First, I want to pick up Dan's definition of good being the minimizing of harm. I think that is a really superficial definition of good. And first of all, good is negatively defined. It's the minimization of harm. What about the positive value of good? Is jazz good? Well, Dan and I agree that jazz is good. Maybe not everyone in the room would. But in what sense does jazz minimize harm? I mean, you could argue that it hurts some people's ears, but what actually is the evolutionary value of music? I mean, other species do not require music to survive. What is the place of a good thing like music according to that definition of good? I think that definition does not work. The reason that you all think that it's good to look after the weak and the disadvantaged is from Christianity's influence on human culture, on Western culture in particular. Did you know that in first century Rome, caring for the weak was not popular? In fact, caring for the weak was frowned upon because it was believed that the weak deserved it. If something had gone wrong, if they were poor, if they had disease, it was their fault. They had offended the Roman gods somehow, and therefore you don't treat them well. It was the Christians who were the first to care for the poor in such a radical way that eventually Emperor Valentian said, we have to start doing this because the Christians are making us look bad 300 years later. So I think that I'm glad that atheists want to live like Christians in caring for the weak, but don't seem to recognize that culturally and historically that sentiment is inherited. It's inherited from Christians. Dan mentioned the fact that the Bible causes confusion. Yes, believers disagree. It's true. Of course that's true. There'd be no place for seminaries if that were not the case, and therefore I would have no job. It's important to understand the Bible on its own terms, and too often the Bible has been used as a political tool for our own ends. And that's exactly this kind of thing that went on among so-called Christians in Ireland. One of the reasons I do what I do is to help people to study the Bible, to read it well. Dan is fond of citing the Bible, often out of context, often against the genre of the text, and often without looking at the overarching narrative of the Bible. This is all too common. That is actually what fundamentalist Christians do. That's the problem with fundamentalists, is that they take texts out of context and they don't understand the importance of genre, and they don't understand the importance of the overarching story of the Bible. Now, as you may know, Dan, in his Christian life, was a fundamentalist Christian, and he has rejected fundamentalist faith, but I would submit to you, still reads the Bible like a fundamentalist. And as a result, Dan caricatures God. Nowhere in the Bible do we get the sense that God is some crazy, angry, spaghetti monster God who has this list of rules that you must keep. Actually, if you understand the ancient context in which the Old Testament is written, you know that laws are part of covenant making. You form a covenant, say between two people groups, or say within a marriage. And with a covenant comes a set of agreements called covenant terms. Law is not a good word for what we find in the Old Testament. That's come to us through Latin. But covenant contract or covenant agreement is much more what we see. In fact, God saves Israel out of Egypt first. He saves first, and then he offers the terms of their covenant relationship, the agreement. We do that all the time. We do that in marriage. There are certain terms and expectations. So, that exclude others, for example, for better or for worse. This is a covenant code. And that is what we find in the law, the so-called law, in the Old Testament. Dan said that Hitler was no atheist. Well, I disagree. Hitler was a nihilist, as is clear from his autobiography, Mein Kampf. And Hitler scholars, I think, most of them at least, would agree that Hitler was using Christianity to gain political influence. And once he had got where he needed to, all of a sudden references to Jesus were quickly dropped. So to call Hitler a Christian is a crazy twist of history. On that theme, Dan says that no atheists are nihilistic. Well, except for Hitler, perhaps, and a few extreme philosophers. My point is not that you are a nihilist. My point is that you should be a nihilist. Not that I want you to be. It would be a terrible way to live. But if you're an atheist, it is the logical conclusion of your worldview. And Dan tries to draw a distinction between cosmic purpose, which he agrees is meaningless. I hope you caught that. There is no meaning. Dan agrees. An atheistic worldview says there is no ultimate meaning or purpose in life, but that there is immediate purpose, immediate meaning. I find that distinction artificial. That is why the philosophers who sat down and really thought it through came to the conclusions that they did. That nihilism was the outcome of atheism. The reason there aren't that many nihilists in the world is because not enough atheists have sat down and thought through the implications of the worldview. And I submit to you again, nihilism is the implication of an atheistic worldview, as Dan admits. Putting it off to the future doesn't change the reality. It is still meaningless. Finally, in his rebuttal, Dan sort of referred to the God of the Old Testament as a genocidal maniac, and I'm sure we will talk some more about that idea. But again, this is a very selective reading of the God of the Old Testament that completely ignores the compassion, the mercy, the goodness of the God of the Old Testament, and completely ignores the context of, say, the Canaanite conquest. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, Moses tells the people that the reason that God wants them to enter the land of Canaan is because Canaan has become a wicked collection of tribes, wicked beyond the history of humanity, involved in child sacrifice, killing their own sons and daughters, and his time for mercy is over, and now it is time for judgment. The psalmist cries out in Psalm 137. The psalmist often, the various psalmists in the Psalms often cry out in ways that are not actually endorsed in the Bible, like crying out to God. What are you doing, God? That is not God's voice at that point in time. That is the psalmist crying out to God, you see. So you need to read these things in context. The Psalms are designed for the people of God in a liturgical setting to be able to express their frustration, their grief, their praise, their joy towards God. And of course there is a lot of theological truth within the Psalms. That's why they're included in the Old Testament canon. But you misunderstand the purpose of the Psalms if you were picking out and proof texting a verse here or there to try to make God look like a maniac. Ultimately, God has every right to judge humanity if God is the author of life. If we are created by Him, if He has given us life, and He has made us not only to live on the earth in harmony with each other, but in relationship with Him, and we have all shaken our puny fists at God and said, "Get lost, God, I don't want to know you," or "I'm going to deny that you even exist," God has every right to grant your wish through proper judgment. Natural justice, or immediate justice, as Dan referred to it, is imperfect. If there is no justice beyond the grave, then Hitler got away with it, didn't he? Is there justice for Stalin? Is there justice for the 9/11 terrorists? Where is the justice there? They did not appear before a court of law. An atheistic worldview cannot cope with the justice that the world needs.
Thank you. Now we're going to go into the cross-examination session. Dan Barker, you are up first. You have 5 minutes to ask questions. You're free to stand up, or you can do the back and forth sitting down. Okay, great. I will time you guys 5 minutes.
So, as I read, Psalm 14 said, atheists have not done anything good. They are all corrupt. Are you agreeing with me then that the Bible made a mistake?
No, I don't agree with that at all. Because again, this is an issue of understanding what the Bible means by good. So when I say atheists can be good, well, I believe that insofar as we are using the word good in a common way, the way that you're using it, the way that we all understand it, doing good for other people and so on. But that is not necessarily the way the Bible defines good. So when the Bible says there is no one good, what it means is, at our hearts, we have rebelled and rejected against our Creator, and at our hearts we put our own interests ahead of others. And therefore, the Bible does not regard human beings as inherently good because of the problem of the human heart.
So I quoted Psalm 137:9, which was one example of dozens and dozens of examples through the Old Testament that you say I'm taking out of context. I've read the Bible as much as you have and studied it. In fact, I have a new book coming out based on Richard Dawkins' famous first sentence in chapter 2, The Most Unpleasant Character. Each chapter documents at least 250 examples of genocidal, unfair, unjust, misogynistic, sadomasochistic, malevolent actions of the God of this Bible, who was so jealous that he said wickedness means not loving me. That's what wickedness means. Very rarely, if you can tell me in the Old Testament at least, very rarely do we find any examples of good being treating other people. Wickedness and good meant not worshiping the right God. So tell me, what was the context of Psalm 137:9?
Well, as I said, it's more about understanding the genre of the Psalms in general. The Psalms are about a psalmist pouring his heart out to God. And that's why you have Psalms, my God, why have you forsaken me?" which Jesus quotes on the cross, Psalm 22. The Bible is not saying, therefore, that God is saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You see my point? It is a psalmist in the act of devotion crying out to God. And these psalms may have been sung, they're set to music for the congregation, so that in periods of suffering or intense trial, individuals and collective groups were able to be honest with God. That's one of the chief values of the Psalms, is that it gives believers permission to be truly honest with God. Say, "God, I do not get what you are doing." And there are many things, therefore, in the Psalms that Christians will feel uncomfortable with, rightly so. They are uncomfortable with it themselves, and yet God allowed it. It's still included in the Bible, is the point here. If you're trying to make God look good and avoid this, series of accusations, why include this stuff in the Bible? The point is, God has no identity inferiority complex. He's happy for people to cry out against him and say, "What's going on, God?" But the point of each psalm is that the psalmist eventually comes around and reflects on the goodness of God and tries to understand what God is doing even when they don't fully comprehend it. And that is the devotional value of the Psalms.
So are you saying we should throw out part of the Old Testament? When God told Moses in Deuteronomy to tell the people to go in and massacre and commit complete genocide of the Amalekites. In fact, he chastised Saul for not doing a totally complete job, and he praised David for doing a greater job of genocide. When God told Moses to tell the people to kill those innocent babies, the Amalekites, who had no sin or crime in their own lives, should we ignore that? What's the context of that? Why would God tell his own people to kill innocent? And not only there, but there's hundreds of examples of that. Why would God say that? And why would he allow the psalmist to say you should be happy to kill innocent babies? Why?
I don't think there are hundreds of examples.
There are.
And I think that, as I mentioned before, in Deuteronomy 12, in part, the conquest of Canaan is a judgment for the Canaanites. The expression to kill all of them is an idiomatic expression that is used oftentimes in Hebrew literature to refer to an overwhelming effect. Like, say, for example, the phrase, all of London came out to see the Queen. Did every single person in London go out to see the Queen? No, it's an idiomatic expression. And this is the problem with the fundamentalist way of reading the Bible, is there's no appreciation of idiom and other devices of literature that are commonly understood when we're talking normally amongst ourselves. But as soon as you take it in the Bible, you say, see, it says every, that's fine.
The Bible says very clearly, and I'm sure you're wrong about this, every man, every woman, every child, every animal, leave not a single thing breathing. You shall exterminate them and wipe them out completely, because I am a jealous God who wants you not to worship their God. What's wrong with the context of that? Why are you defending and looking the other way when this monster is committing atrocities? Why aren't you more moral?
Thank you. Sorry, time's up.
All right. Saved by the bell. The first question I'd like to ask Dan is, what objective grounds do you have for life according to humanism?
I don't believe, and I don't speak for all atheists, okay, and we're welcome to disagree with me, but I don't believe there's such thing as objective moral values, because that reifies the concept. Values are judgments in our mind. But I do think there is an objective basis to justify our moral philosophy and our moral values. And as I said earlier, it's real harm in the real world. Should I commit this act or this act? Look at the real harm in the real world. The hunger that results, the disease that results, the inequality that results, whatever it can be, the killing, the death, whatever. The objective basis for making moral decisions rests in the natural world with the natural harm that results. That's what you mean by harm. That's how you would judge a religion to be good or bad, is how they treat other people, how peaceful, how kind, how they try to eliminate obstacles that threaten our well-being, which are material natural harm. So we do have an objective basis in the real world to justify our moral decisions.
Well, I think you've answered the question, why is it good to minimize harm? But you've not answered the question, why is it good to protect humanity? What is inherently good about humanity that requires protection?
There's nothing inherently good. I mean, that's a moral judgment. And I think you're equivocating in your usage of the word good. In fact, you went so far as to say good music is somehow equivalent to good moral decisions. The word good can mean different things, but in the context of morality, not jazz music or Islamic architecture, which I think Islamic architecture is beautiful. I don't believe in Allah, but I think, wow, look at that. We can applaud all of that. But in the context of morality, good is a material and natural thing. What was the last part of your question? It was, we need to improvise here. People here. Yeah.
Okay,
I lost it.
Let me ask you another question. Do you agree with my statement that nihilism is the logical outcome of atheism?
No. Nihilism implies an immediate feeling and philosophical position that affects the way you live your daily life. That's what nihilism means. If you want to use the word nihilism in a different way, if you want to continue equivocating and say the universe itself can somehow have feelings that are nihilistic, Well, then I could borrow that word and say, yes, the cosmos itself has no ultimate meaning or purpose or value in and of itself. And I think that's great because it magnifies our own meaning. We give higher value to things that are rare. We give less value to things that are eternal. If life is eternal, then life is cheap. The fact that it is precious and brief is what gives it more of its value. So, yes, there's no ultimate cosmic purpose. There's no purpose of life, but that doesn't mean there's no purpose in life. As long as there's problems to solve, as long as there's harm to minimize, there's immense purpose and meaning and struggle and joy and purpose in our daily lives where it matters now. Who cares that our species is going to go extinct someday? There's no guarantee that we're going to live forever. We won't, which enhances the value and moral value of our lives right here in the here and now.
I'm interested in the distinction that you draw between the cosmic nothingness, cosmic meaninglessness, and the immediate experience of life. And I guess I'm asking you to justify that discord. I mean, should we not live in a way that is consistent with our worldview? If we have any objective basis to morality, should it not cohere with the way we think things really are? And the sub-point is, in other words, is not your contented life, even though the universe is ultimately meaningless, nothing more than an illusion?
Even if that's true, we still have it. Even if life is brief and brutal and short and there's no ultimate cosmic meaning, that's a fact of reality that we can live with. Courageous people can live with that. People who don't like the brutal facts of reality are going to invent some cosmic transcendent thing that gives overarching meaning because they're not happy with the way the world really is. So yes, we should be consistent with our philosophies. Most atheists that I know do want justice. We want it in this world. We do want peace. We do want our loved ones to continue living on. We do want extended happiness. We want all those things. We have our kids and we have our friends. We're human beings, you know. I was on a TV show once where the host asked me, "So you're an atheist? Do you love your children?" Like we're somehow weird creatures. We think immediate justice and peace and meaning and joy is much more important, much more precious than some invented purpose from some being that you haven't even made a case for tonight.
Thank you. Some very fascinating arguments have been made by both debaters. We will now take our 10-minute break. Please make sure to fill out those questions and put them in the white basket in the back. And make sure to come back in exactly 10 minutes because we'll be starting shortly.
Nobody has a question.
So welcome back. We're going to be starting our second half of the debate. We'll be starting the second rebuttal session. Dan Barker will get you going first, and he has 10 minutes. We'll just wait a little bit until people go back and sit down. Great, we'll go ahead and get started. Dan Barker.
I brought a copy of my chapter on genocide, one of the 21 chapters in the book, the genocidal actions of the God of the Old Testament. And there's too many to read. Talk about context. I don't know how you can twist these words to mean anything other than they mean. Thus says the Lord of hosts, now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them. Kill both man and women, child and infant. Passage after passage after passage in the Midianites, and in Numbers 31, I guess I have to apologize. There's one place where they were not all killed. Listen to this. Now, God said, now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man by sleeping him. But the young virgins who have not known a man, keep them alive for yourselves as war booty. So they did that. If they were so infected with evil, why did they allow these women to breed with the Israelites anyway? 32,000 young virgin girls were taken and given to the Israelites, and 32 of them went to the priest. They didn't say what the priest wanted with 32 virgins. That's the Bible. Passage after passage after passage. And Kant talks about us taking things out of context. He's doing exactly the wrong thing when you talk about context. Context is not taking the whole Bible as one big book. Context is not interpreting some passage from the first millennium BC, going 1,500 years later to some Greek passage in a different country, in a different time, written by a different author, in a different language, and then saying, see, this verse interprets this verse. That is not context. You don't understand the context of the Bible by looking at the whole picture. That is wrong. All that shows is that the Bible is contradictory, because, oh, well, this needs to be explained by this. Anybody can play that game. In context, God himself said very clearly, who knows what the name of God is? There's one place where God actually told us what his name is. Who knows what it is? You should know that if you're a Bible believer. What?
Yahweh?
No.
I am.
The Jews called him that. Well, he said, I am the Yahweh. He didn't. He said, you shall call me I am that I am. So yeah, Yahweh is one of the names that the ancient Jews used. But when God himself said, my name is, what was it? Jealous. My name is jealous. I am the jealous God. Don't look at the other gods. If you look at the Bible in context, you'll notice that almost exclusively in the Old Testament, the word wicked and evil, words that Khan used tonight, the words wicked and evil, in my reading, at least 98% of the time, had nothing to do with human actions to other human beings. Nothing. You know what they had to do with? You know who were called wicked and evil and why? Read the Bible. Why were they called wicked? Why were they called evil? Because they worshipped another god. That's like a husband, jealous husband saying, if you even look sideways at another man, you're going to die. During the wedding ceremony, the covenant that Khan talks about, there is a covenant given in Deuteronomy where God established a covenant with his bride, the nation of Israel. Have you ever been to a wedding where the groom says, yes, I do promise to love you and obey you and be your husband, but if you cheat on me, I'm going to tear your hair out, I'm going to cut your face, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to spread dog poop on your face. Those are the things that God in the Bible says he's going to do to the nation of Israel. Is that a covenant, a loving covenant? It's a jealous, possessive, male, macho, alpha male covenant that this jealous God has with his own private people. He's going to make a little love nest by killing out all these Canaanites. We have no historical evidence that the Canaanite people were any different from the Israelites. The Israelites practiced rape, they practiced infanticide, they practiced filicide, they practiced aborticide in the Bible. God ordained in the Bible. And Khan wants to make it look like the Canaanites were such evil people. There's no evidence. They were just people like anyone else. Look at it archaeologically. If anybody was evil, it was the Jewish people themselves who thought they were God's people. By the way, do you know how we know that the Jews were God's chosen people? Yeah, because it says so in a book that they wrote, that they're God's chosen people. That's how we know that they're God's chosen people. They wrote this thing. Those people wrote this thing. Are we obligated in the 21st century to follow the primitive ideas of these macho? It was obviously men who wrote the Bible. He calls, if Israel goes looking at other gods, it calls her a whore or a fornicator. You're looking, they're using all this sexual imagery. God of the Bible is full of this kind of sexual imagery towards his people. Kind of like the guys who wrote the Bible. They were probably sexually frustrated guys who wanted, to control women, really. And when you look at the God of the Bible, he was pretty much the same way. So let's talk about context, but let's talk about context. The fact that the Psalms are poetry, how does that make what they say any better? Suppose I were to write a poem that says, yes, I love you, my wife, and I will cut off your fingers if you cheat on me. That's a poem, by the way. That's a poem, right? Don't take it literally. Even if it's a poem, it's ugly. Even if it's poetry, even if it was the expression of the people. The 23rd Psalm, you hear that on Sunday morning in a lot of Christian services. You don't hear pastors getting up and saying, by the way, we shouldn't pay much attention to the 23rd Psalm because that wasn't God speaking. That was just God. I suppose if you believe the Bible is divinely inspired, God divinely inspired the writer of the Psalms to write those things. And he said very clearly, not that you should be regretful. He said you should be happy, or some translations say you should be blessed. to take the innocent children of the Babylonians and pick them up and throw them against the stones. Poetry or not, that is despicable. That is immoral. It should be cut out of the Bible. It should be cut off. It should be taken out of the homes of any decent, loving people. Whatever you think about Hitler, and I agree with Kahn, he brought it up, that Hitler was a horrible person. I think Hitler was a horrible Christian. I don't know what kind of a Christian he was. He did credit Jesus. He was never excommunicated by the Catholic Church. He actually signed, Nazi Germany had a concordat with the Catholic Church, and yes, it was political. And I think most of the blame was with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was trying to protect its own butt during this time. They needed a concordat with Nazi Germany so that they could protect their own property. So yeah, there was a horrible political reasons going on there. But one thing you cannot say about Hitler, and must never say about Hitler, he was not an atheist. He believed in God, some kind of a God. He was not an atheist. In fact, the Nazis wore Gott mit uns, God is with us. Whatever is meant by that, and I'm sure it didn't represent the kind of God I believed in as an evangelical Christian, whatever is meant by that, that is not atheistic. You cannot say that Nazism or Hitler is some kind of a product of atheism. It's not. You can't even say that about Stalin, by the way. You can't find a single quote that Stalin said attributing his actions to his atheistic philosophy. His was also political. He was a horrible atheist. He's somebody that we should denounce. It's the tyranny that we denounce. It's not their moral philosophy. If a moral philosophy or a religious view is discounted because of the actions of some of the crazy French people in that religion, well then Christianity is discounted as well for all of its historical atrocities through history. And when I was a Christian minister, I would have said, well, don't blame all of us for the actions of a few. Exactly. Do the same thing with atheists. Don't blame all atheists for the actions of a few psychopaths. So, Kahn asked early on tonight, why are we moral beings? Did I run out? Oh, good, okay, good. And that's kind of a, why are we moral beings? Because if we weren't, we wouldn't be here. If our ancestors didn't care about falling babies, they would have had much less chance of their genes passing on into the future to you and me. We have inherited instincts from our ancestors. That's what natural selection is. That's why we're all different from each other. That's how we got here, because your mom and dad had sex, and their mom and dad had sex, and they were successful. They were able to breed. By definition, life is survival and reproduction. But morally, we are social animals. We have to deal with each other in a social tribe. We have to get along with each other. And with language and with a larger frontal lobe and a larger cranium, we can deliberate about our actions to other people. We can come up with good reasons, objectively based reasons for the moral philosophy we might choose. And I think all of us, basically, who are mentally healthy, use harm as the measure. We want a world with less harm, less violence, less threat to our well-being. We want a world with more peace, more love, more understanding. Duh, we all want that. There's no big religious revelation. Wow, some religion came up with this. We evolved with those instincts. You naturally care for your kids. You naturally care for your nieces and nephews and for your neighbors, and you naturally care for other species as well. Humanists care for all life on this planet because we all recognize we are part of a web of life. Moral instincts come to us, and Thomas Jefferson even said that. It looks like they were implanted within us. You can't help being good. It feels good to be good. You actually get a chemical kick to the head when you're doing altruistic work for people. It's a natural, physical, biological thing that happens to us that doesn't need to invoke some transcendent being in the sky for which you have no evidence or no definition or no argument for, just some unconnected dots that without this thing there would be no basis for morality. So yes, you can be good without God.
Well, Dan is very cross with the God he does not believe in. And he asked me to make a case for the existence of God, and I'm glad to focus on this. It was mentioned in my biography earlier that it's the resurrection of Jesus in particular that ought to be the focus of this question. First of all, our morality, since that is our overall topic, is perfectly consistent with what the Bible says about how God has made us. Okay? It's not simply the case that I say, well, there's no explanation from Darwinism, there's no explanation from naturalism, etc., therefore it must be God. No, the point is, the theistic explanation fits with Christianity's biblical understanding of what human beings are, made in the image of God. We're moral beings because God has made us to be that way in his likeness. But back to the question about how do we even know God exists? I became a Christian because of the evidence. It's interesting, Dan talks about the fact that he stopped being a Christian because he started using his brain and looking at the evidence. My story is the reverse, so we kind of cancel each other out that way. I did not have a need to believe. I was perfectly happy not believing. I did not have excessive guilt that needed to be done away with. In fact, at the time of my conversion, I was living with my uncle and aunt in the city of Campbell. Lived quite near the music school that I was studying at. My uncle is an avowed atheist. I'm very close to him. He's a great guy. And I love him, and I know he loves me, though he's disappointed that I'm a Christian. And just ironically, he's also my godfather. And in case you don't know, it's meant to be his responsibility to raise me in the knowledge of God. So he considers me his greatest failing as a godparent anyway. He challenged me every night when I came home. Every night he'd say, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And it wasn't just an intellectual, hey, have you thought this through? It was like, I don't want you to believe this. You're wrong. Pushing me, pressing me. It forced me to do the work and to look seriously at the claims. And I realized relatively quickly it hinges on the resurrection of Jesus. We can talk about other issues. Is there evidence from creation? We can talk about the cosmological argument, the theological argument, those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, the Bible itself says the testing point is the resurrection of Jesus. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, Christianity is false, and we are the greatest of fools. People usually say that religion is not falsifiable, but Christianity is falsifiable. It gives you the testing point. If the resurrection did not happen, it is false. If the resurrection did happen, it is the truth. So, did the resurrection happen? The resurrection is the key. At Macquarie University, where I gained my doctorate in ancient history, professors in ancient history, I would talk to them about this issue, freely admit that there is good evidence for the resurrection of Jesus from a purely historical point of view. If you ignore science and whether it's possible for someone to rise from the dead and look purely at the historical evidence, they would agree, whether believers or not, they would agree that there is plenty of historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, it's clear that there is no, to my knowledge, nor to theirs, there is no professional ancient historian, and by that I mean someone who is employed by a reputable tertiary institution to teach history, not to teach German or flute or something, but to teach history, who doubts the existence of Jesus. And Dan, in one of his books, says there's very scant evidence for that, but let's just get rid of that idea straight away. There's no serious historian employed as an historian who even would question the existence of Jesus. But as I say, the key question is the resurrection of Jesus. The historical evidence says the only way to put together the first century is to accept that may be completely unbelievable to our minds, nevertheless the historical event of this resurrection. One historian, Paul Barnett, has argued that the pieces of the puzzle of the first century do not fit together without the resurrection of Jesus. Right? This is the way historians work, especially ancient historians. You've got data from different sources. You try to put them together. You try to understand how things happen and why they happened and so forth. The pieces simply do not fit. There is simply no way to account for the explosive growth of the early church, the universal claim of the resurrection of Jesus, the hundreds of living witnesses who gladly testify that he rose from the dead, and the impact of their genuine belief that it had on the communities around them and eventually on Rome itself. Can you, Dan, point to decisive evidence that Jesus did not rise from the dead? No, I don't believe you can. The reason you'll deny it is because, well, people don't rise from the dead. That's the most common answer I hear. Could Jesus have risen from the dead? The answer is people don't rise from the dead. But that is a rationalist argument rather than an empiricist argument. Empiricism is based on evidence. Rationalism is simply based on reason. But our reason can be wrong, though it is a useful tool, of course. Empiricism or empirical inquiry goes wherever the evidence leads you. And the evidence leads you to the resurrection of Jesus. At least it did for me. And I would encourage you, if you're serious about checking it out, if you're serious about investigating the claims of Christianity, look at the evidence for yourself. When Jesus rose from the dead, he was raised to life by God, his heavenly Father, in fulfillment of ancient promises. This did not just happen out of the blue or in a vacuum. Dan has been picking on difficult bits of the Old Testament, and I understand why. Okay, even though I think several of them are taken out of context and cherry-picked, if you're familiar with that phrase, just picking bits and pieces here or there. Nevertheless, there are difficult texts. I'm not going to deny it. But there are other parts of the Old Testament that are relevant to this question. Say, for example, the prophecy of Isaiah, chapter 53, written 700 years before Jesus was born, says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities, punished for the peace was put upon him. And we are healed by his wounds. We all like sheep went astray. We have all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted. He, like a lamb, was led to the slaughter, and like a sheep was silent before his shearers. He did not open his mouth. They made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man at his death, although he had done no violence and not spoken deceitfully." And so it goes. A prophecy that so clearly points to not only the sacrificial death of Jesus, but even the resurrection of Jesus. So much so is this the case that a friend of mine, Jewish friend of mine in Sydney, letterbox dropped this text without a title to a bunch of Jewish households in the neighborhood. And it was a suburb with a lot of Jewish households around Easter time. And the church got a number of calls, some irate calls, saying, you know, how could you letterbox drop us with your Christian propaganda? And then it was explained to them, actually, that text is from the Hebrew Bible. It's from the prophet Isaiah. So clearly does it point forward to Jesus' death and resurrection that Jews thought it was from the New Testament. And such is the case for many texts in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. It points forward to Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of God's plan. He died and he rose again in accordance with his purposes. And yes, God is rightly jealous for us. Not jealous in a petty way. Not the way that a husband would be jealous. Not in a human husband. Just in the same way that when God is angry, he's not angry the way that we are angry. You stub your toe and you're angry about it. Or you're stuck in traffic and you fly off the handle or something like that. It is a just, righteous anger that God has. And he's jealous because God wants us, who he made, to belong to him, to be with him. And that is the reason for Jesus' death and his resurrection. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll have a closing statement. Stand bar for you of 10 minutes.
Thank you for coming. I tell you, there's nothing more fun than this. It's kind of like, I don't know, skydiving or mountain climbing or something. Because, you know, when you're in front of a live audience and you're thinking on your feet, it's like, whoa. I don't know why people say the fear of public speaking is so bad. I think it's great. I think we're all human beings, right? We're all just in the same room. We're just wanting to talk with each other. So thank you, Con. You're very gracious. It's obvious you're a good man, a good Christian, and a smart man. But the resurrection of Jesus was the absolute worst possible example you could give to prove Christianity or the existence of a God. Forgetting the fact that even if a man did rise from the dead, how do you connect the dots between that and a God? There could be some other explanation. I don't think the story even happened. There's no doubt, and you're right about this, there's no doubt that belief in the resurrection of Jesus had a big impact in the first century and all centuries since then. Just like belief that Muhammad was inspired by Allah to write the Quran had a huge impact on history. The belief and the resulting religion that flowered from those early beliefs does not mean those beliefs were grounded in reality. It happens all the time. When Elian Gonzalez was found on that raft coming into Miami, there was this belief that the angelfish and the Virgin Mary was coming, and this huge cult spread up all over the place, thinking that this guy from Cuba was going to be the next Messiah. There was a huge belief. People were claiming to be healed from it. The vision in Medjugorje. Belief is a very powerful thing, and belief can start world religion, so there's no doubt about that. But the resurrection of Jesus, you say the pieces don't fit without the belief. Well, obviously, you equivocated again. You say the scholars don't doubt the resurrection of Jesus. What they don't doubt is that there was a belief in the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection stories, and I write about this in great depth, are more contradictory than any part of the whole Bible, because they are told at least 4 different times, in fragments of at least 5 times. I have challenged people, and no one's ever met this challenge yet. And let me challenge you to read the Bible, Con, and read it in context. Take every single account of the resurrection of Jesus. Take Matthew, take Mark, take Luke, John, and then take 1 Corinthians 15, which actually was the earliest account we have, Paul's version, which, by the way, did not use the word resurrection. It just used the word visionary appearance. Opthi from Orama, which wasn't a physical meeting. Paul never claimed to meet Jesus physically. He said, he appeared unto me, but no one thinks he shook hands with him. It was like a vision in the sky. There were no testimonies of actual bodily meetings with Jesus. There were testimonies of people who thought they had seen. And the 500 was not documented. It was actually written 25 years later to a bunch of people 1,500 miles away in Corinth who had no way of checking who these people were. But they take those accounts and then write a coherent narrative of the resurrection of Jesus, leaving nothing out. Please do this. This is what I've done. Read the Bible, please. Leave nothing out. Everything from Easter morning to the Ascension, right? Take that and then put them together and write a coherent narrative that doesn't contradict itself. It cannot be done. And not just on minor things, on huge important things. It is an incoherent narrative. You've seen these Bible harmonies that try to put them together. Why does the Bible need a harmony? Obviously, something is wrong here. They cannot all have been right. Was the tomb open or was the tomb closed when the women arrived? What was it? Was it open or was it closed? You Christians who know your Bible, who use the resurrection of Jesus as your evidence for God. Was the tomb open or was the tomb closed when the women arrived?
Both.
Which one?
Both.
How come nobody's answering besides the
Go back to mechanics. It was both open and closed.
It was both. When Matthew says when the women got there, the tomb was closed, and the rock was going to roll it away from us, and then the earthquake happened. A huge earthquake that caused a stone to roll away, and no historians noticed this. It would have caused massive chaos. Think about what would have happened with an earthquake like that. There would have been death and mayhem, and yet they're making these leisurely strolls to Emmaus in the day. There's at least 17 irreconcilable contradictions in the resurrection stories. There's a much better explanation for it, and that is the explanation of legend. There may have been an early account of a man named Jesus who died, and his apostles and followers thought he had gone to heaven, just like you think grandma died and went to heaven, right? It wasn't a bodily resurrection. Peter prayed and he said, I talked with Jesus. So there's no doubt that some early Jews thought that their Messiah had risen to heaven, but not bodily. In fact, even Paul says, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. And 15 years later, when Paul sees Jesus on the road to Damascus, was he hanging up in the clouds? Did he need to shave? I mean, did he have a body up there? Are we talking about a physical body, or are we talking about a visionary experience? There are many, many, many problems, serious problems, with the fact of the resurrection of Jesus. And I can't go into all of them today, except to say that I think Con is exaggerating. Con is cherry-picking scholars and quotes that he thinks. In some cases, I agree with you. Some skeptics say there might have been an empty tomb. So what? What does that prove? Even if there had been an empty tomb and a man came back to life, how do you connect that to the existence of a God? And then what God? So the resurrection is not good. We don't have time to talk about the historical existence of Jesus. I think the probability is very low, but it's not zero. Just like I think the same thing about Paul Bunyan. It's not zero, but it's pretty low. I think this whole debate boils down to your view of human nature. When I was a Christian minister, I used to preach, we are all corrupt. We are no good. We are all deserving of hell. We are bad. We can't make moral decisions on our own. We're like little children. We need a father, a daddy, to tell us how to live. The Christian view of human nature is pessimistic and negative. We are infected with sin. All the Abrahamic religions are that way. We are bad. Don't you feel bad? Don't you feel like and you need to be saved. You need to be redeemed from yourself. That is a negative view of human nature. Atheists and agnostics don't have that view of human nature. We don't see ourselves as sick. Even Jesus in Matthew 9:12 said very clearly, those who are healthy don't need the doctor. Only they who are sick, right? Who was he talking about? They who are healthy don't need the doctor. We atheists consider ourselves healthy. We don't buy into this myth that there's original sin and there's something wrong with us. Yeah, we've got problems. Of course we all have problems. That gives meaning and purpose in life, is to solve those problems. But we weren't born with original sin. We weren't born corrupt, evil, damned people that need to bow down before a dictator who is only satisfied with some blood is being spilled and sprinkled on the altar, and then the blood of his own son being spilled. I mean, what kind of morality is that? We think we should be good for goodness sake. If you are motivated by the promise of heaven to be good to other people, that kind of shows how little you think of other people. You're doing it for a selfish reason. If you are motivated by the threat of hell to be good to people, that shows how little you think of yourself. That means you don't think you're capable of being a good person all on your own. My mom used to say, if you want to be happy, then just be happy. And I think we could say the same thing about morality and goodness. If you want to be a good person, you don't need an excuse. You don't need commands. You can be a good person. I was invited to do a presentation in Canada of world religions. It was a big panel of world religions. And I refused it at first because I said atheism is not a religion. Atheism has no creed, no dogma. It's just the absence of religion. And they said, but we want you to come, so we'll call it world religions and philosophy. So I said, all right. So I sat on the stage with a Buddhist and a Hindu and a Muslim and a Catholic and a bunch of others. We sat on the stage, and the topic was salvation. What does salvation mean from your respective religious traditions? What does salvation mean to an atheist? What does that actually mean? Well, when Jesus said they who are healthy don't need the doctor, only they who are sick, we atheists don't even need to go to the doctor. We don't even have to go. We don't even have to admit there's anything wrong with it. So what I said, and this got printed in the newspaper the next day, what I said was, if salvation is the cure, then atheism is the prevention. Just don't get sick. Don't buy into that myth. Don't buy into this religious lie that there's something cosmically wrong with you and there's some eternal destiny at stake. Live your life now and don't sacrifice the joy and the purpose and the love and the beauty and the family of this life on the altar of some cosmic future reward and justice. Live now. Live your own life. Don't be cheated of this life and the beauty that's in it now by surrendering yourself to the will of a dictator who you're afraid of, or that you have to fear God. I wish we could talk a lot more about this, but I think most atheists are humanists. We would say that the reason to be good is not because it was instilled to us by God or because of commands. We should just be good for goodness sake.
Thank you also for being here this evening, and thank you to Dan for your contribution. You're sharp, learned, and very worthy opponent, and I've enjoyed sparring with you, so thank you.
Yeah.
Next time, okay. The resurrection. Dan asked, how do we know that it points to God? And the answer is, as I said before, because of the fulfillment of prophecy. Isaiah 53, 700 years before Jesus' birth, interprets the events of Jesus' death for us and his resurrection. We know because of that and several other texts in the Hebrew Bible that interpret the events of those early days of the first century. On the Gospels, Dan says they're inconsistent, but he is reading the Gospels like they're science textbooks or like strict modern history. Of course, they're not written in the genre of modern history. They are written in the Greco-Roman genre of bioi, or bios, the Greco-Roman genre of biography, and they fit that genre quite well. And the way that they choose to portray the events are in complete keeping with the rules of that genre. So the Gospel of John, for example, moves around some of the events out of chronological order. And someone like Dan will say, well, clearly this is not historically reliable. But that's like saying that a modern-day film of Abraham Lincoln that starts with his assassination and then moves back in time is not historically reliable. You understand naturally from the genre of the film what's going on there. That's within the rules of the genre. And again, I'll appeal to the fundamentalist type way of reading the text that Dan has. That it's got to conform to very strict rules of interpretation that do not account for genre, do not account for idiom. But in this case, in particular, genre is the key. But more important, I think, than the subtle, and I do disagree that there are major inconsistencies in the Gospels, the apostles, they are the reasons why I came to faith. They did not believe when Jesus died. They were huddled in a room. They locked the doors. They were cowardly. They were afraid of what was going to happen next. Peter himself had denied even knowing Jesus 3 times. And yet 3 days later, they burst out of their room and proclaimed the resurrection of Jesus. And they gave their lives to that. Not only most of them giving their lives in a horrendous way, literally, executed by Nero, for example, but dedicating the rest of their lives to that point and suffering in many ways for this truth. Now, you don't have many options for interpreting this. You could say it was a conspiracy. Or do you find that plausible? Again, you have to look into it. You could say they were mistaken, that it was someone else appearing to them as Jesus. Or perhaps, as Dan tried to argue, that they thought it was a ghost, which is completely implausible. See my hands, see my feet, give me a piece of fish to eat, right? This is what Jesus says in John chapter 20, not with that poetic form. But the point is, the disciples did not claim only to see an apparition, but a raised physical body. And this is what makes the resurrection of Jesus absolutely unique in the ancient world, so that critics who try to say, well, this is just like a pagan resurrection myths where you have the spirit rising, the Gospels present an entirely different picture that stands in contrast to those Gnostic, Greco-Roman, pagan stories. So, was it a conspiracy? Were they mistaken? Was it a group hallucination where more than 500 people saw the same thing, and this group of 12 to 20 saw the same shared hallucination over a period of 40 days? I find it easier to believe that God raised the dead than to believe that. But you have to work that out for yourself. But in closing, I want to reiterate a few things that we've seen and issue a final challenge. I've argued that atheism cannot account for the fact that we are moral beings, nor can it determine what good is. Dan skates over the thorough evil that humanity has committed throughout our history and concludes that humanity is basically good. The evidence speaks otherwise. Not only on a large scale, with mass genocide and so forth, but in our own hearts. Nihilism is the darkest of all options, but it is the only logical conclusion of atheism, as Dan himself has as much as admitted, on a cosmic scale, which is simply to say, yeah, when you look at the big picture, everything is meaningless and there is nothing that matters. We're here today, we're gone tomorrow, nothing makes any difference. There's no basis for morality at all, there's no hope. Nihilism is the absolute nightmare. Albert Einstein, in a discussion on science and religion in Berlin in 1930, said, "You were right in speaking of the moral foundations of science, but you cannot turn around and speak of the scientific foundations of morality." According to Einstein, science cannot form a basis for morality. Quote, "Every attempt to reduce ethics to scientific formulae must fail." Love is the greatest good. Unlike humanism, which is ultimately self-serving, and it's a fairy tale because it's not grounded in anything objective. Real love is grounded in the love of God. It is grounded in God's own nature, since God is love. Love is sacrificial and puts the needs of others ahead of one's own. And Jesus died for love. He died for you and for me. He died to save us from ourselves, from the wretched evil of hatred toward other human beings, from the mess we've made in this world, and from the ungrateful, rebellious rejection of our Creator. And only Jesus Christ can fix our deepest problems. Only He can extend God's forgiveness to each and every one of us. Only He can make us right with God and ultimately reconcile us to each other. And only He can show us how to live in a way that loves all, even our enemies. It's not about commands, as Dan caricatures. It is about a change of heart. Jesus can and will change your heart if you let Him. So where do you stand? Some of you here tonight came as committed atheists, others as committed Christians, and yet perhaps others as uncommitted, sitting on the fence. To the atheists here tonight, I want to say thank you for listening. Your presence here indicates a level of respect and openness rather than casual dismissal. But I want to leave you with a challenge. Have you thought through all the implications of your worldview? Are you a nihilist? If not, why not? That is the logical conclusion of atheism. You should be a nihilist, and if you're not, you are inconsistent. But the truth is, not many people want to be a nihilist, as Dan points out, because it's too depressing. If you're not a nihilist, you should admit to yourself that you are not being consistent. There is an internal inconsistency within you, and something is telling you to reject nihilism, and rightly so. Don't go there. Instead, reconcile your internal discomfort in the other direction. Open your mind to the possibility, just the possibility, that you've got it wrong. That it is possible that God exists. That it is possible to know Him through Jesus Christ. If you're saying, no, I'm not even going to open my mind to that, then that is just casual dismissal. To the agnostics here tonight, thank you also for listening. You may be more open, perhaps, to think about possible worldviews, and I'm glad for that. But please hear the same challenge. Think on what you've heard tonight, talk about it, and see where it goes. But my special challenge to you is, you can't sit on the fence forever. Don't remain undecided, but set about making up your mind. It may feel more politically correct to stay uncommitted, but this will do you no good in the long run. And to conclude, I want to reflect on a few words from Woody Allen, recently taken from an interview. He says, in the universe, as you know from the best physicists, is coming apart, and eventually there will be nothing, absolutely nothing. All the great works of Shakespeare and Beethoven and Da Vinci, all that will be gone. Now, not for a long time, but gone. Much shorter than you think, really, because the sun is going to burn out much earlier than the universe vanishes. So you won't have to wait for the universe to vanish. It'll happen earlier than that, and there'll be nothing. So all of this achievement, all of the Shakespearean plays and these symphonies, and the height of human achievement will be gone completely. There'll be nothing, absolutely nothing. No time, no space, nothing at all, just zero. So what does it really mean?
Great, thank you so much. Let's give them another round of applause. All right, we will now begin our question and answer session. We have Matthew and Andrew coming up, and they'll be answering some questions that were written down. You're free to stand up as well to answer those questions.
Is there a time limit on the question answer?
We have a total of 20 minutes for questions and answers. We're going to try to do about 10-15 minutes of actual written down questions, and if there was some kind of question that wasn't addressed that someone feels passionate about, they're free to stand up and ask the question.
Okay, so this first question includes two quotes and a question. So the first one is by J.P. Moreland, a Christian philosopher. He says, "My motive for being moral should be because I love God. I recognize Him as my creator. I want to do what is right for His own sake, and I desire my own welfare in this life and the life to come." The second quote is an alternative to that, the humanistic one, which is, "I love humankind. I recognize my debt to society. I want to do what is good for its own sake. and I desire my own welfare in this life as well as generations to come. So this question is for Constantine. Both of these quotes appeal either to humanity and the other to God. If you agree with J.P. Moreland's quote, why is it better or more objective than the second?
Can I see the quotes?
Yeah.
If I can read this. Okay, thank you. So the question is, why is it better and more objective? Is that right?
Yes.
Well, the objectivity, okay, first of all, the atheists in the room are going to say this is not objective because you don't believe that God exists. Okay, but if we are assuming for a moment, from a Christian worldview, that God does exist, then the objectivity is grounded in God's nature, not his commands so much as his nature. His commands give expression to his nature. And his commands are summarized by Jesus: love God and love your neighbor. So they're objectively grounded because they're grounded in our Creator, who is a moral being himself and has given us morality. Does that answer the question?
This question's for Mr. Barker. It says, does your objection to Christianity assume that Christianity is primarily about morality? A little side note he wrote, in other words, that you have to be good to go to heaven instead of, as a Christian would say, about grace.
My primary objection to Christianity is that it's not true, regardless of whether it's moral or good. It might be a useful religion. It's possible to have a religion that's untrue but useful. There are many myths that are useful. My primary rejection of Christianity is on the intellectual question of whether or not it's true, whether or not the Bible is reliable, whether or not the evidences and arguments for God are good or not. That's primary. My secondary objection to whether it's true or not is moral. Who would want to worship such a bully, such a monster? The Bible is basically command motivated, and even Jesus, who Khan just quoted, saying you should love God and love your neighbor. When Jesus said you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, he was quoting the genocidal God of the Old Testament who was preparing the Israelites to go into the Promised Land to commit the genocide. You're going to live in cities you didn't build. You're going to harvest crops that you did not plant. You're going to go and take over and kill all of them. And when you get there, don't be tempted by their other gods. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart. Jesus was quoting admirably the words of a genocidal commander who was telling his chosen people to go in and commit atrocities. So yeah, we can talk about love all we want, but when you actually look at it in context and look at where the words come from, and Jesus even said, I and my Father are one. If you see me, you've seen the Father. He loved that God. He thought he was his Father. So my secondary objection to Christianity is that it's a very bad moral system with horrible role models in it. Any one of us could do a much better job of coming up with a moral philosophy.
Again, this question is directed to Dr. Constantine. If all religions teach men to be good, then what is the importance of holding on to one religion if all the religions teach good values?
I can answer that by taking Dan out of context and twisting the words a little to say, because it's true. That's it for me. At the end of the day, you may not like the God of the Bible, but that does not mean he's not there. In fact, the God of the Bible is very likable, and I think Jesus is a better interpreter of who he is than some people in the room. But the bottom line is, Dan is right. What is the truth?
Again, for Mr. Barker, without an ultimate standard to which measure morality, does not everyone's definition of good, quote unquote, simply fall apart? If there is no ultimate standard, nothing makes your definition of good any better than Hitler's. Sub-question, sorry. Which also begs the question, how do you justify your disgust of evil? Is there no ultimate good?
Well, whoever wrote that question was not listening. Hitler was bad because he caused unnecessary harm. Do you understand the word harm? Harm is a natural threat or challenge to our well-being. Physical harm in the real world. Hitler was objectively bad because he caused unnecessary harm in the real world. We can judge that. Hitler might have thought, I'm doing the right thing. The rest of us who are not like him, the rest of us who are mentally healthy, and he had to be some kind of a psychopath, so did Stalin. He had to be sort of psychopathic and not mentally healthy to act the way those few weird tyrants of history have acted. So, you don't need a standard for morality. What you don't need a code, you don't need a standard. Whoever makes up these things, morality is this big capital M thing that needs to have a source or a standard. Morality is none of that. Morality is a principle. Act with the ways of minimizing harm. It's like a compass. A compass doesn't tell you where you are. A compass doesn't tell you where to go. A compass doesn't tell you what to do. A compass only points to where north is. If you think of north as minimizing harm as much as possible, then that's how you can be moral. Sometimes you might have to travel east or west a bit. Sometimes you might even have to travel south a little bit. Sometimes you might have to cause some harm to minimize overall harm. That's a good, workable, objective principle that crosses all religions and all moral philosophies, that doesn't require us to believe in some transcendent ghost for which there's no real evidence. The resurrection of Jesus notwithstanding is a bad example of evidence for God.
For Dr. Constantine Campbell. So this question addresses the argument from evil for God. How do you answer Kira's statement about if God is all merciful, all powerful, and all knowing, how does he permit evil in the world?
Evil and suffering is one of those classic questions that lead people away from faith and is often constructed around a syllogism like that. If God is all-powerful and if he is good, and yet there's evil in the world, therefore God is either not powerful or he is not good. But that is a silly syllogism. If you read the Bible, the explanation for evil is that we live in a world that is out of whack with God. That he has created us to live in relationship with him and with each other, and by rejecting him, we cause conflict not only with him but with each other. And God permits the consequences of that. He permits evil in the world. He permits suffering. But he has said there is a day when he has appointed a judge to judge the crimes of humanity and to end suffering and pain. So it's not as though God is unconcerned. God is concerned, but he actually, out of his mercy, allows us to continue in our current state, to come to a point of repentance, to come to a point of getting it right with God and with each other.
One last question for Mr. Barker. If Dr. Campbell is wrong, there seems to be no implications. But if you are wrong, are you able to justify that possibility? Just bring it around.
Ask the question that you define implications.
I guess I'm assuming what the person is saying. If Dr. Campbell is wrong, there's no God, we don't have to deal with a heaven or hell. If you are wrong, do we have to deal with that? How do we So, yeah.
There are implications. There always are implications. We are social animals who live in a certain number-sized tribe. It used to be about 150 people. We evolved to need to relate to other human beings, and we've come up with systems. Some people might want to call it a social contract, some people might want to call it law, but whatever you call it, we have to get along with each other in some way or another. And consequences happen as a result of our actions. If you run across my garden and you trample all the flowers because you're escaping somebody who's chasing you and wants to kill you, I'm not going to press charges. But if you run across my garden because you hate my family, well, then I am. The intention of it. There are implications, and even the law considers intention. And And that's why I said the way to be a good person is to act with the intention of minimizing harm. Sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes, in spite of our best intentions, we goof, so we should want to learn by that. So there are implications in the real world where it matters. The fact that there's no cosmic justice, the fact that Hitler's not up there somewhere saying, I was wrong, oh, I was so wrong. He's dead, he's gone, there's no judgment to him at all. If we're going to have judgment, we better do it now. We better make things better now while we can. Because in the cosmic picture, we may not like it. You may be uncomfortable with the brutal fact that there's a meaningless ultimate cosmos. I don't know. I kind of find it kind of exciting that in spite of that darkness, we live for a brief moment. We're enjoying our vacation while it lasts. It's not going to last forever. And I think that gives it more meaning. So yes, there are implications in the real world. The fact that they're not ultimate, whatever that means, doesn't mean they're not real.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes to ask 2 more questions. Is there anybody in the audience that had a particular question that they really wanted to ask? Go ahead. And I'll repeat the question if we can't hear it.
Okay. This one's for Mr. Barker. You're saying, making the point that there's no moral code for us to live by. If the Bible has a moral code, then we're supposed to live by moral standards. And atheism is supposed to live by a moral creed. Is it living, which you said, living to be good is to minimize harm? Is that a moral code?
The principle of minimizing harm is not a code. A code is a list of things. A code is something that's prescribed. Here's what thou shalt do, or thou shalt not do this or that, right? The 10 Commandments turns out to be a really bad moral code, except for the 3 that have relevance to modern American law, which would be killing, perjury, and theft. The others the first 4 have nothing at all to do. What kind of a code is that? It has nothing to do with human conduct. It's about how you worship and what day of the week you should worship and what words you can say and what art you can make. That's not a moral code. When you make decisions in your life, you're not looking up a code. What you and I do, I assume you're a believer, you and I are both doing the same thing. We are using situational ethics. We're evaluating the results of our actions in the context of the natural world using a principle, like the compass. We're using a principle. Principles are much more important than moral codes because they're flexible. You can't have a code that says it's always wrong to tell a lie. Even Rahab in the Bible was praised for telling a lie to protect the Israelites. You can't make a rule like that, thou shalt never tell a lie. Sometimes a lie is the best thing you can do. A code would prohibit that. A principle would be able to understand in context what's the minimal amount of harm we're going to try to get with. So don't confuse code and standard with what we natural, and I think most believers do the same thing in their daily lives, with the principle of trying to minimize violence and minimize harm in the real world. It's a good principle. We're here because of that principle. It's not perfect, we make mistakes, but it's a great compass to get through life. And it's actually objectively workable, unlike a religious code.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Is there one particularly aimed towards Dr. Constantine Campbell? Yes.
All right, Dr. Campbell. Even if God is the objective basis for morality, how can Christians further claim an objective understanding of morality when their own interpretations of the Bible and even of morality itself so subjectively disagrees with one another?
That's a very good question, and like I said before, that's why we have seminaries. I do believe that, notwithstanding Dan's comments, that the Bible is intended to be read as a whole. There are indications within the text that confirm that. So, for example, in the Old Testament, it has intertextuality within the Old Testament. That is, it quotes and cites and alludes to and refers to earlier parts of the Old Testament. And as the canon, that is a collection of books, the Old Testament grows and then the New Testament canon grows, there is a growing consensus that this is to be read as a whole, drawing on themes that run throughout the Bible. Considering 66 different books in half a dozen different genres by several different authors, there is a remarkable unanimity in terms of the overarching story, theme of the Bible. Now, when people miss that, that is when we get into trouble. That is like when we get the fundamentalist, for example, who doesn't know how to read, who doesn't know how to read in immediate context, the sentence, the paragraph, the chapter, the book, the author, the canon, and the whole. There's several layers of context. who doesn't understand literary devices, for example. There are all kinds of ways that you can get reading wrong. And the primary reason I think that Christians disagree about various parts of the Bible is because we're reading texts as humans, and they are human texts. Christians don't deny that. We believe they're inspired by God, but they are genuinely human texts also, with all the ambiguity that comes with our humanity. So we wrestle with them, and we train ourselves to be good readers, which is a skill that can be applied to any kind of text, not only biblical texts. And as we seek to do that, I think we find increasing uniformity among believers. So it's astonishing that I can virtually agree with almost everything that Augustine in the 4th century thought about the Bible, because he was a good reader, and I like to think I'm a good reader too. Or take John Calvin, for example, 500 years ago, and so on. Of course there are aberrations, of course there are disagreements on small level issues and on bigger level issues, but it's the nature of the Bible that gives rise to those things, because God respects the humanity of the process of the authorship of the Bible, but also our own humanity. And the reality is, our humanity is messy.
Great, thank you. All right, that does conclude our question and answer session. Let's give Dan Barker and Dr. Heather. Just a couple things before you leave. You do have that other response card. If you're interested in hearing more about Cru, they also have a card out there that talks about some future events that they'll be having. Secular Student Society, we meet every Thursday, so if you're interested, please put your name and email and we will contact you. I would also just like to thank one more time Cru, the UIC Program of Religious Studies, the Secular Student Alliance, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation for making this night possible. I think that wraps everything up. The response cards just put in the white basket. Also, we are video recording this, so if anybody's interested in directly receiving the video, put your name and email on a separate piece of paper on the registration table. If you have any questions, feel free to come up to me as well. Thank you so much. Have a good night and stay warm.